Hey folks, the Flying Scotsman here, and welcome to this video. In this video, I thought I would go over Windows 2.0 in the same way that I've went over various versions of Windows before. Now this should have probably came last year, or at the very least there probably should have been a video about Windows 2.11 this summer, but unfortunately that didn't happen. So I thought I would do really the whole lot together. Now, as I've been doing research on Windows 2, I've actually found that there's really not much about it anywhere, but it was still quite an interesting version of Microsoft Windows. So, well, let's start. Well, Windows 2.0 is a 16-bit Microsoft GUI-based operating system environment that was released on December the 9th, 1987, and was a successor to Windows 1.0. So let's go and take a look at this now. So, let's have a look at Windows 1.0. The version that we're going to take a look at in this video is version 1.01, which was the most popular version. So, in order to get into this version of Windows, just like other versions of Windows that preceded 95 or NT, what you needed to do was to actually launch it yourself from the DOS prompt, or at least put a line in autoexec.bat that would do it for you. Now with Windows 1.0, for whatever reason, on this install, it doesn't actually seem to have put the Windows installation directory into the path statement on autoexec.bat, so I actually have to manually navigate to the Windows directory and then type win. And here we are. So this is the MS-DOS executive, and the reason everything looks a wee bit squished up is because it is actually using the EGA resolution, which isn't actually 4:3. It's something else which I can't honestly think of right now. I think it's actually quite literally 64:35, because the because the EGA resolution is actually 640:350, as opposed to the regular VGA resolution of 640:480. Now, Windows 1.01 did have a couple of restrictions on it. So, if I launch Windows Right, I'm not going to be able to take a spreadsheet from 123 and then paste it into Windows Right, and then Miami Vice and Ferrari, take this Ferrari and paste it into Windows Right. But I've launched Right, and MS-DOS Executive has disappeared. I mean, you'd think that would be perfectly normal, because you want the full screen for Windows Right. Right? Right. Pun not intended. But let's say we want the two up on screen together. So we double click on the MS-DOS Executives icon, and oh, it's all tiled. We can change the order of the tiling, but we can only tile it. Now, let's imagine we wanted to launch Can You Believe It Reversey. Yeah. So it doesn't even divide the screen up into nice wee thirds. It's, yeah. You know, we could launch the calculator. Yikes! It's not even doing this properly. maybe... now we're starting to be able to tile stuff. So it's not completely intuitive. So I could have, I guess I could move right to the bottom left. Whoops. Okay then, maybe not. Maybe if I can size it. See, I can do that. But let's just close out of all these now. And if we go to the window menu, we notice how the options look to be quite different from what we're used to. I'm just going to reopen right just for a wee minty. So, we have size and move, which are perfectly normal. But icon, zoom. Well, icon is equivalent to minimize. It literally just puts it down as a wee icon. And zoom, well, that's equivalent to maximize. And then you go to the zoom option again to put it back to a regular size. Now obviously this quite strange and quite frankly cumbersome Windows behaviour is actually due to Apple having tried to actually claim that overlapping windows was their idea and would be cribbing too much on the look and feel of the Macintosh system software. Now, that would later be disproved, but we'll come to that. So that is a wee bit of the Windows 1.0 window management. Now, there were applications actually written for Windows 1, but there weren't that many. But what I can do is show you an example of one such program, Aldous PageMaker. The original version of Aldous PageMaker. So, what we can do is we can make a new publication, orientation full, or we could tall or wide, so that's portrait or landscape. Can make double-sided, facing pages, number of pages, margins, and I have actually set up a printer in this version of Windows so that I could get access to some fonts and what have you, and so that some programs would actually work. So this is your standard desktop publishing application, and you can draw things, and then the right mouse button is actually used to zoom in. That's pretty cool. And then we can oh look, it's got its own icon. You can change the lines and the shades. There we go. And we can even make some rounded corners. It'll annoy Apple even more. Look at that. Just like an iPhone. But then there's also the rounded square here as well, and then that's... And then there's what looks to be a crop tool. I'm not sure how to use that yet, but there you are. So there were applications actually designed to run under Windows 1.0, and that would actually work pretty well under that environment. So, it wasn't... it wasn't completely useless, but unfortunately it didn't really sell too well. And to be honest, in my opinion, I think a lot of PCs that people had on their desks really couldn't take advantage of Windows 1.0 to its fullest extent. But there you have it. That is Windows 1.0. And if we want to actually shut it down, we go to the special menu, which is very like OS X. We go to the special menu, which is very like Macintosh. We go to the special menu, which is very like the Macintosh system software, and go to End Session. This will end your Windows session. However, unlike the Macintosh that would basically bring up a window saying it's now safe to turn off the machine, which only happened in later versions of the system software, by the way, you would be dropped down to an MS-DOS prompt, where you would then be free to switch off your computer. So that is Windows 1.0. So now that we've seen what Windows 1.0 was like, let's move on and take a look at Windows 2.x. What did Windows 2 do that improved over Windows 1.x? Well, let's find out. Windows 2.0 allowed application windows to overlap each other, unlike its predecessor, which could display only child windows. It also introduced more sophisticated keyboard shortcuts and the terminology of minimize and maximize as opposed to icon size or icon eyes and zoom in Windows 1.0. The basic Windows setup introduced here would last through Windows 3.1. But like Windows 1.x, Windows 2.x applications cannot be run on Windows 3.1 or up without modifications, since they were not designed for protected mode. New features in the 2.0 version of Windows included VGA graphics, although in 8 colors only. It was also the last version of Windows that did not require a hard disk. Of course, you could actually run it from a floppy disk officially. People have ran Windows 3.1 from a floppy disk, but this was not officially supported by Microsoft. With the improved speed, reliability and usability, computers now started becoming a part of daily life for some workers. Desktop icons and the use of keyboard shortcuts helped to speed up work. The Windows 2.x EGA, VGA and Tandy drivers notably provided a workaround in Windows 3.0 for users who wanted color graphics on 8086 machines, a feature that version did not normally support. Extended memory support was also included for the first time. And the Windows 2 GUI was licensed by IBM for their OS 2 as the presentation manager. The two companies, Microsoft and IBM, stated that it and Windows 2.0 would be almost identical. The first Windows versions of Microsoft Word and Excel ran on Windows 2.0. Third-party developer support for Windows increased substantially with this version. Some shipped the Windows runtime software with their applications for customers who had not purchased the full version of Windows. However, most developers still maintained DOS versions of their applications, as Windows users were still a distinct minority on the market. Windows 2 was still very dependent on the DOS system, and it hadn't passed the 1 megabyte mark in terms of memory. Stuart Alsop II predicted in January 1988 that any transition to a graphical environment on IBM-style machines is bound to be maddeningly slow and driven strictly by market forces because the GUI had serious deficiencies and users had to switch to DOS for many tasks. Now, I said before that Windows 2.0 had overlapping windows, whereas 1.0 didn't. Now, the reason for that is that Apple were trying to claim that overlapping windows was their property. Now, while Windows 2.0 did have overlapping windows support, this did not escape the attention of Apple computers, who actually filed a lawsuit against Microsoft and Hewlett-Packard on March 17th, 1988, accusing them of violating copyrights that Apple held on the Macintosh system software. Apple claimed that the look and feel of the Macintosh operating system, taken as a whole, was protected by copyright and that Windows 2.0 violated this copyright by having the same icons. Right. The judge ruled in favour of Hewlett-Packard and Microsoft on all but 10 of the original 189 graphical user interface elements that Apple sued on, and the court found that the remaining 10 GUI elements could not be copyrighted. So, with all that said, let's actually go and take a look at Windows 2.0. So let's have a look now at Windows 2.x. I think what we're going to do in this video is take a look at Windows 386. However, there are not really much differences between Windows 2.0 and 2.1 superficially. So, what we can do though is take a look at Windows 286 just by typing in Win86. Now, as you can see, we are now in VGA mode. Brilliant. The mouse pointer looks like a more regular mouse pointer, which you might see. And if we were to go into Windows and launch something like write.exe, you'll find that the windows themselves will behave more like regular windows, as they are now overlappable, and they have a wee border which can be resized, and you have regular maximize, which goes down to restore, and minimize buttons. Now, Windows 2.0 still uses black and white icons, but if we go into the window menu, which is now the now kind of a line or a dash or whatever you want to call it, it is actually, it does use the terms that we are familiar with today: minimize, maximize, move, size, and obviously you can close a window. So, like Windows 1, Windows 2 has a lot of different utilities. You have a wee calendar, and you have a card file, which is basically like a computerized Rolodex. You also have the clipboard viewer, which is actually quite a useful wee program. Lets you have a look at what you've got copied and pasted to the clipboard. You have the control panel, which was a thing in Windows 1.0. So now you have new options. You can set your border width. So I could make this border really huge. And there we go. So I'm just going to put that back to 5. So now let's actually take a look at Windows 386. Okay, now unfortunately I don't really have any DOS applications installed. Well, maybe a couple. And as you can see, I'm able to actually launch those from within Windows itself for the first time. But trust me on this one, you probably should not be running fdisk from within Windows 2. Especially not on the DOS version 4 version. It's not going to go well, I promise you. I can promise you that's going to go very, very badly wrong. What else do I have? DOSshell.bat. Whoops. Can't run a .sys file. Whoops. Yeah, that went well. What I can do, though, is run a command window. And there you go. You have... Okay, it doesn't want to run DOS shell. I probably should have installed some applications though to show you, because I have had WordPerfect running in here. However, MS-DOS is only kind of part of the equation. What we can do is run a couple of Microsoft applications, because this was the first version of Windows that had versions of Word and Excel written for it. So, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to welcome you all to Microsoft Word version 1. Okay, it's 1.1, but yeah. So here we go. So it's basically like any other version of Microsoft Word. Let's see, can I do size 14? I can do coloured. And I can even have page view. So that's what we're going to do. And yes, the toolbar at one time was called a ribbon. So, if you can believe it, the ribbon paradigm was being used 20 years before Office. Well, it was being used at least 18 years before Office 2007. Well, actually, more like 16. So this is a Word document, so I can unfortunately, the standard shortcuts hadn't really kind of been established, at least not according to Microsoft Word. And there was even a version of Microsoft Project. So I could show you that now. Oh, we're out of memory. Isn't that nice? So some programs in Windows would actually, if launched from the DOS prompt, would actually try and launch Windows along with them. And if this was actually, if this had actually been set up properly by me, it might have done it. But what I can do instead is I can show you Windows as a runtime environment, which actually came with some programs, notably Microsoft Excel. Okay, so that's not actually installed the runtime environment because I didn't need it. But it shows, it tells me what I need to do in order to run Microsoft Excel, so Win386 Excel. However, what we're seeing now is basically what we would see, minus the MS-DOS executive, if I had just Excel installed without Windows. So, what I can do is, you know, just usual Excel stuff. So, let's so I can start this up. There we go. Because this is the British version, it knows that I use sterling. Although that probably could change once we go independent, but this version of Excel is way too old to take advantage of that. Anyway, so let's Okay, so we've got some figures just drummed up. So what I'm going to do, equals sum B2 minus C2. So that would be income less expenses, and that would give me profit. I wonder if there's a fill down option. Yes, there is. And then I want to total these up. So B2, B13. Oh. There we go. And then what I'm going to do there is I'm going to fill right. So total profit for the year is £2,991. So what we could do now, I'm guessing, can we make a chart? Oh, we can make a chart. I don't know if we can make a chart. Can we make a chart? Really don't know. Oh well. But I know what we can do. I can copy this spreadsheet and I can drop it into Windows Right. So there you have it. And what I will do is I will save that. And then to exit Windows, well, we can go to Special again, but we can also go to File and Exit. And now we're at the DOS prompt. Okay, so that is Windows 2.0. But that wasn't the end of the line for the Windows 2.x series of operating systems. In 1988, Microsoft did actually release another version of Windows 2. This was called Windows 386. And this was designed to run on the 386 architecture. Now, Windows 2.0 was retroactively named Windows 286. So versions 2.1 of these were both released on May the 27th, 1988, less than 6 months after the release of Windows 2.0. Although there were versions of Windows 386 as early as version 2.01 in September 1987, which was slightly before Windows 2.0 in December 1987. These versions can take advantage of the specific features of the Intel 8286 and the Intel 8386 processors. A hard disk was required for the first time to install Windows. On Windows 286, Windows 286 actually takes advantage of the HMA to increase the memory available to Windows programs. It introduced the HiMem.sys DOS driver for this purpose. It also included support for several extended memory boards, EMS, although this support is not related to the 286 processor. The segmented nature of 16-bit Windows programs is quite suited to the usage of EMS, as portions of code and data can be made visible in the first megabyte of memory accessible to real-mode programs only when the program using them is given control. Microsoft encouraged users to configure their computers with only 256K of main memory, leaving the address space from 256 to 640 kilobytes available for dynamic mapping of EMS memory. Despite its name, Windows 286 was fully operational on an 8088 or 8086 processor. Windows 286 would simply not use the high memory area since none existed on an 8086 class processor. However, EMS could still be used if present. A few PC vendors shipped Windows 286 with 8086 hardware. An example was IBM's PS2 Model 25, which had an option to ship with a DOS 4.00 and Windows kit for educational markets, which included word processing and presentation software useful for students, which resulted in some confusion when purchasers of the system received a box labelled Windows 286 with a machine that was definitely less than an 8286. As for Windows 386, that was much more advanced than its predecessor. It introduced a protected mode kernel, above which the GUI and applications run as a virtual 8086 mode task. It allowed several MS-DOS programs to run in parallel virtual 8086 CPU mode rather than always suspending background applications. Windows applications could already run in parallel through cooperative multitasking. With the exception of a few kilobytes of overhead, each DOS application could use any available low memory before Windows was started. Windows 386 ran Windows applications in a single virtual 8086 box with EMS emulation. In contrast, Windows 3.0 in standard or enhanced mode ran Windows applications in 16-bit protected mode segments. Windows 386 also provides EMS emulation, using memory management features of the 8386 to make RAM beyond 640 kilobytes behave like banked memory previously only supplied by add-in cards and used by popular DOS applications. By overwriting the win200.bin file with command.com, it is possible to use the EMS emulation in DOS without starting the Windows GUI. There is no support for disk-based virtual memory, so multiple DOS programs had to fit inside the available physical memory. Therefore, Microsoft suggested buying additional memory cards if necessary. Neither of these versions worked with DOS memory managers like CMMM or QEMM, or with DOS extenders, which have their own extended memory management and run in protected mode as well. This was remedied in version 3.0, which is compatible with Virtual Control Program Interface, or VCPI in standard mode, with DOS Protected Mode Interface, DPMI, in 386 enhanced mode. All versions of Windows from 3.0 to 98 exploit a loophole in EMM 386 to set up protected mode. Windows 3 also had the capability of using the DWEMM Direct Write Enhanced Memory module. This is what enables the far better and more sleek graphical user interface, as well as true extended memory support. Byte in 1989 listed Windows 386 as among the distinction winners of the Byte Awards, describing it as a serious competition for OS2, as it taps into the power of the 386. On March 13th, 1989, Windows 2.11 was released in Windows 286 and 386 editions, with some minor changes in memory management, AppleTalk support and faster printing, and updated printer drivers. Windows 2.11 was superseded by Windows 3.0 in May 1990, but supported by Microsoft for 12 years until December the 31st, 2001. And that brings us to the end of this video. So I hope you've all enjoyed watching it and learning about Windows 2.x. Please do join me for my next video. Cheery bye.